The research station floated in the cold darkness of space, orbiting a massive gas giant called Seven. The station was old and gray, built by the Galactic Collective more than 100 cycles ago. It served one purpose only. It held the most dangerous creatures ever discovered in known space. Scientists from dozens of alien species worked there, studying predators that had killed thousands across the galaxy. They kept these creatures in special cells with energy fields that nothing could break through. At least that is what they believed. Dr. Al walked through the main corridor of Containment Level 7. He was a tall reptilian being with 6 limbs and scales the color of dark copper. His eyes were yellow and never blinked. He had worked on this station for 40 cycles, longer than most species lived, and he had seen things that would break weaker minds. But nothing frightened him more than the creature in Cell 47. The Shadow Beast. He stopped in front of the viewing window and looked inside. The cell appeared empty at first glance. The walls were white and bare. The floor was smooth metal, but Al knew better. He pressed a button on his data pad and the thermal sensors activated. Now he could see it. A shape huddled in the corner, darker than shadow itself, with 6 legs folded beneath its body and a long tail curled around it. The tail ended in a sharp barb that held enough venom to kill a dozen in seconds. The creature was roughly the size of a human canine, but it was no simple animal. There were apex predators from a death world near the galactic rim. They could phase through solid matter like ghosts walking through walls. They hunted in complete darkness using heat signatures alone. They had wiped out entire survey teams before anyone understood what they were facing. The collective had classified them as extinction-level threats, which meant that if even one escaped into populated space, it could kill thousands before anyone stopped it. Al made notes on his data pad and moved on. He had 30 more specimens to check before his shift ended. He did not notice the small flicker in the energy field behind him. He did not see the shadow beast lift its head and watch him go. 3 levels above, Grace Harper sat at her workstation in the Environmental Control Center. She was a human woman of 32 years, with brown hair tied back in a practical knot and tired eyes that had seen too many long shifts. She was the only human on the station, serving as a liaison officer between the collective and Earth's government. Most aliens did not understand why humans wanted to be involved in galactic research. They considered humans too young, too fragile, and too emotional for serious scientific work. Grace had spent 2 years proving them wrong. Her console beeped with a routine alert: temperature fluctuations in Sector 9. She typed in a correction and sipped her cold coffee. The station was always having small problems. The systems were old and the collective refused to spend money on upgrades. Grace had written 17 reports about the failing infrastructure. No one listened. The lights flickered once, then twice, then they went out completely. Grace grabbed her flashlight and stood up. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, painting everything in dull red. Her console was dead. She tried her communicator, but it only gave static. This was not a routine fluctuation. Something had gone very wrong. The alarm started then, a high screaming sound that echoed through every corridor. Grace had heard it once before during a drill. It was the containment breach alarm. Something had escaped. She ran to the door and looked out into the corridor. Other crew members were running past, mostly, and heading toward the evacuation shuttles. A security officer grabbed her arm as he passed. His name was Lieutenant, and he had tusks and gray skin and eyes full of fear. "Human, you must evacuate now," he said. "Specimen 47 has breached containment. The shadow beast is loose." Grace felt her blood go cold. She had read the files on everyone on the station had. The creature could be anywhere by now. It could phase through walls and ceilings. It could be standing right beside them, invisible in the shadows, waiting to strike. "Where is it?" she asked. "Unknown. It entered the ventilation system. We cannot track it," released her arm and ran toward the shuttles. "Evacuate now. The station will be purged." Grace did not follow him. She stood frozen in the corridor, thinking. If the creature was in the ventilation system, it had access to the entire station, including the shuttle bay. If it reached the evacuation ships before they launched, it could kill everyone aboard. And if it somehow reached the planet below, or worse, stowed away on a ship bound for populated space, millions could die. She turned and ran back to her workstation. Her console was still dead, but the manual controls were mechanical. They did not need power. Grace pulled open a panel in the wall and found the old switches and levers that the original builders had installed. She could redirect the ventilation pathways from here. She could seal sections of the system one by one and trap the creature in an isolated area. Her communicator crackled. A deep voice came through the static. Admiral, the station commander, with white tusks and decades of military service. Human Harper, why are you not at the evacuation point? Admiral, if I can redirect the vents, I can contain the creature. If it reaches the shuttles, everyone dies. There was silence on the other end. Then spoke again, and his voice was heavy. You understand what you are saying. If you stay, you will be alone with the shadow beast. No one will come back for you. The station will be destroyed once evacuation is complete. I understand. Another long pause. Grace could hear alarms and shouting in the background. The evacuation was almost complete. Very well, human. May your gods protect you. We will wait as long as we can before we trigger the purge. The communicator went dead. Grace took a deep breath and started working. She pulled levers and turned switches, closing vents and opening others, creating a maze of dead ends that would funnel the creature toward the cargo bay in Section 12. It was slow work. The manual system was not designed for speed, and somewhere in the walls around her she could hear movement, soft scraping sounds, something climbing through metal passages, something hunting. The red emergency lights cast long shadows across the room. Every shadow looked like death waiting to strike. Grace kept working. Her hands were steady even though her heart was pounding. She was not a soldier. She was not a scientist. She was just a liaison officer with a coffee addiction and a stubborn refusal to let innocent people die. The scraping sounds grew closer. Grace pulled another lever and sealed another vent. The creature was being funneled toward her position now. She had made herself the bait. It was the only way to keep it away from the shuttles. She heard a soft thud above her head. Something was in the ceiling directly over her workstation. Grace looked up slowly. The ceiling panel was ordinary white metal, just like every other panel on the station. But she knew something was on the other side, something that could phase through that metal whenever it chose. Grace stood very still and waited to die. The ceiling panel bent downward slightly. Grace could see the metal warping under the weight of something heavy. She held her breath and pressed her back against the wall. Her flashlight shook in her hand, throwing wild shadows across the room. The emergency lights painted everything in blood red. She had never felt so alone in her entire life. The panel gave way with a soft groan, and the creature dropped into the room. Grace had seen pictures and thermal readings. She had read reports and watched security footage from the attacks, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of a shadow beast standing 3 meters away from her. It was beautiful in a terrible way. Its fur was the color of deep space, so black that it seemed to swallow light. 6 legs supported a body that was lean and powerful. Its head was broad with pointed ears that swiveled toward every sound. 2 eyes glowed faintly amber in the red light, fixed directly on Grace. The tail uncurled slowly, rising behind the creature like a scorpion preparing to strike. The barb at the end glistened with something wet. Venom, Grace knew. One scratch would paralyze her. One full sting would stop her heart. She did not run. Running would trigger the chase instinct. Every predator in the galaxy responded to fleeing prey. Instead, Grace stood perfectly still and lowered her eyes. She had read somewhere that direct eye contact was a challenge among many species. She did not want to challenge anything. It took a step toward her, then another. Its claws clicked softly on the metal floor. Grace could smell it now, a strange scent like rain on hot stone, not unpleasant, just alien and wrong and terrifying. It circled around her slowly, moving between her and the door, cutting off her escape. Not that she had planned to run. Grace kept her eyes down and her hands open at her sides. She tried to control her breathing. She tried to control her heartbeat. The creature could probably hear both. The stopped directly in front of her. Its head was level with her chest. Those amber eyes studied her face with an intelligence that surprised her. This was not a mindless beast. Something was thinking behind those eyes, calculating, deciding. It leaned forward and sniffed her hand. Grace flinched at the touch of its cold nose against her skin. The creature made a sound, a strange chittering noise that vibrated through the air, not aggressive, almost questioning. It sniffed her other hand. Then it pushed its head under her palm the way a dog might when seeking affection. Grace was so shocked that she almost screamed. She clamped her mouth shut and forced herself to stay still. Her hand rested on top of the creature's head. Its fur was softer than she expected, like touching cool silk. She could feel a faint trembling running through its body. It circled her legs once, brushing against her, and then lay down beside her workstation. It curled into a tight ball with its tail wrapped around its body. The amber eyes closed halfway. The trembling continued. Grace stared down at the most dangerous creature in the galaxy as it pressed against her legs like a frightened animal seeking comfort. Her mind raced through everything she knew about biology. They came from a warm world. Their body temperature ran higher than most species. The containment fields probably disrupted their thermal regulation somehow, and the emergency protocols had dropped the station temperature significantly to prevent fires. The creature was cold. It was going into thermal shock. Grace moved slowly, carefully, telegraphing every motion. She unzipped her station jacket and slipped it off her shoulders. The watched her with half-closed eyes but did not react. Grace bent down and draped the jacket over the creature's body. It made that chittering sound again and pressed closer to her legs. She could feel it seeking her body heat through her uniform pants. Humans ran warm compared to most galactic species. She was like a living heating pad to this freezing predator. Grace sank down to the floor next to her workstation. Her back pressed against the cold metal wall. The shifted and crawled partly into her lap, pushing its head under her arm. She could feel its heartbeat, fast and irregular, slowing gradually as warmth seeped into its body. "Okay," Grace whispered. Her voice was shaky but calm. "Okay, we are going to be fine. You are going to be fine." The creature's ears swiveled toward her voice. It seemed to like the sound. Grace kept talking, nonsense mostly, just a steady stream of soft words. The temperature, the station, a story about her childhood dog, anything to fill the silence and keep the creature calm. Her communicator crackled. Admiral's voice came through, broken by static. "Human Harper, status report. Evacuation complete. We are preparing to trigger the purge sequence." Grace fumbled for the communicator without disturbing the creature in her lap. "Admiral, wait. I need more time." "Time for what? The shadow beast will kill you. We must destroy the station before it escapes." "It has not killed me. It is lying in my lap right now. It is sick, Admiral. The cold is killing it. It came to me for warmth." Dead silence from the communicator. Grace imagined staring at the device in disbelief. Finally, he spoke again. "That is impossible. They are mindless killers. They have slaughtered dozens of our people." Maybe they were scared. Maybe they were cold and in pain and defending themselves. "Admiral, I am looking at this creature right now, and it is not attacking me. It is sleeping." More silence. Grace could hear other voices in the background, rapid alien speech that her translator could not follow. Arguments, disbelief, fear. "You have been envenomed," said at last. "The toxin causes hallucinations and a sense of peace before death. You do not know what is happening to you." "I have not been stung. I have not been scratched. I am telling you the truth." "We cannot risk it. The creature must be destroyed. You have 10 minutes to reach an escape pod if you can." The communicator went dead again. Grace looked down at the creature sleeping in her lap. Its breathing had steadied. The trembling had stopped. It looked peaceful. It looked like her childhood dog used to look when it slept by the fire on cold winter nights. She could not save herself and condemn this creature to death, and she could not prove her theory without more time, but maybe she could do something else. Maybe she could show them. Grace pulled out her personal data pad and activated the camera. She recorded everything, the creature in her lap, her own face, clearly not paralyzed or dying, her steady voice explaining what had happened. She transmitted the footage to the evacuation shuttle and hoped someone would watch it. "My name is Grace Harper," she said to the camera. "I am a liaison officer on the research station. I have made peaceful contact with a shadow beast. I believe these creatures are not inherently aggressive. I believe they have been responding to fear and mistreatment. I do not know if anyone will see this message, but I want the truth to be recorded." She lowered the data pad and stroked the creature's dark fur. It shifted slightly and pressed closer to her warmth. "I am going to call you Shadow," Grace said softly. "I hope you do not mind." Shadow made a soft sound that might have been contentment. Grace smiled despite everything. She was trapped on a dying station with the deadliest predator in the galaxy, and somehow she had never felt more certain that she was exactly where she needed to be. The hours passed slowly in the red emergency light. Grace sat on the cold floor with Shadow curled in her lap, talking softly to fill the silence. She told the creature about Earth, about forests and oceans and cities full of millions of people, about her parents who still lived in a small town in Colorado, about her brother who thought she was crazy for joining the Galactic Liaison Corps. Shadow listened with its ears swiveled toward her voice, occasionally making soft chirping sounds that Grace chose to believe were responsive. The station groaned around them. Systems were failing throughout the old structure. Grace could hear distant alarms and the hiss of escaping atmosphere somewhere far away. Admiral had given her 12 hours before the purge. She had used 3 of them sitting on this floor, but she did not regret a single minute. Her data pad buzzed with an incoming transmission. Grace picked it up carefully, keeping one hand on Shadow's back. A face appeared on the screen, not but someone new, with copper scales and yellow eyes that held something other than fear. "I am Doctor," the alien said. "I have seen your transmission. I believe you may be telling the truth." Grace felt hope spark in her chest for the first time since the breach. "You believe me?" "I have studied them for many cycles. I have always questioned the methods used to contain them. Isolated cells, cold environments, constant observation. We treated them as monsters and gave them every reason to behave as monsters." Shadow lifted its head at the sound of the new voice coming from the data pad. Its amber eyes fixed on the screen with that unsettling intelligence. Doctor's expression flickered with something like wonder. "It is truly calm, not preparing to attack." "It fell asleep in my lap 20 minutes ago," Grace said. "I think it was just cold and scared and alone. I think it came to me because I was warm and I did not run." Fascinating. Yellow eyes were bright with scientific interest. Human body temperature averages much higher than other galactic species, and your stress responses produce different chemical markers. You may not trigger the same defensive reactions that we do. Can you convince Admiral to give me more time? I need to prove this is real. "I am trying. The Council is divided. Many still believe you have been envenomed and do not understand your own situation. They fear what will happen if they are wrong and the creature escapes." Grace understood their fear. She had felt it herself when Shadow first dropped from the ceiling, but she had also seen the way the creature pressed against her for warmth. She had felt its heartbeat slow as it found comfort. These were not the behaviors of a mindless killer. "What do I need to do?" she asked. "You need evidence. The research archives on Level 4 contain complete records of every study. If you can access those files and find patterns that support your theory, the Council may listen." "Level 4 is 3 sections away. I would have to move through unsecured corridors." "Yes, with the Shadow Beast." Grace looked down at Shadow. The creature looked back up at her with those amber eyes. It made a soft chirping sound that seemed almost questioning. "Okay," Grace said. "We are going for a walk, Shadow." She stood up slowly, and the creature rose with her. It stretched its 6 legs one at a time and shook itself the way a wet dog might. Grace's jacket fell from its back, and she picked it up and put it on. The warmth felt good after sitting on the cold floor. Shadow walked beside her as she moved toward the door. Not behind her, hunting. Not ahead of her, fleeing. Beside her like a companion. Grace's heart pounded as she stepped into the dark corridor, but the creature stayed calm. It pressed against her leg occasionally as they walked, maintaining contact. The station was a maze of shadows and red light. Emergency power had failed in many sections, leaving only darkness. Grace used her flashlight to navigate, and Shadow seemed to appreciate the warmth of the beam when it passed over the creature's dark fur. Twice, they heard groaning metal and the sound of distant systems failing. The station was dying around them. They reached Level 4 without incident. The research archive was a large room filled with data terminals and storage units. Most were dark, but Grace found one that still had power. She connected her data pad and began searching through files. The records went back decades. Hundreds of had been captured and studied over the years. Grace read report after report looking for patterns. What she found made her sick. Every had been kept in isolation. No contact with others of its kind. No warmth. No comfort. They were treated as dangerous specimens, never as living beings that might have needs beyond food and water. The creatures that survived longest were the ones kept in slightly warmer conditions. The ones that became violent quickest were those exposed to cold and constant stress. One report caught her attention. A scientist named Doctor had proposed a theory 60 cycles ago. He believed there were pack creatures in their natural environment. They formed family groups and shared body heat. They communicated through sounds and touch. Isolation, he argued, was driving them insane. The collective had dismissed his research. They classified the as dangerous and continued the standard containment protocols. Doctor left the station in protest. His files were buried in the archives where no one would find them. Until now. Grace everything to her data pad. She turned to leave and found Shadow watching her from the doorway. The creature tilted its head as if asking what she had discovered. "They were wrong about you," Grace said softly. "They were wrong about all of you." Shadow made a low sound that vibrated through the air, almost like a purr. An alarm started blaring, a new alarm different from the containment breach. This one meant structural failure. The station was breaking apart faster than expected. "We need to move," Grace said. She ran toward the corridor, and Shadow ran with her. The creature matched her pace easily, its 6 legs carrying it in a flowing motion that was almost beautiful. They turned a corner and found their path blocked. A section of ceiling had collapsed, filling the corridor with twisted metal and sparking cables. Grace looked for another route. There was none. They were trapped. Shadow made that chirping sound again, but it sounded different now, more urgent. The creature approached the wreckage and sniffed at the debris. Then it turned and looked at Grace with those intelligent amber eyes. It was asking permission. Grace realized this with a shock. The creature could phase through the wreckage easily, but it was waiting for her to say something. "Go ahead," she said. Shadow walked forward and vanished into the twisted metal like smoke passing through a screen. Grace heard movement on the other side, scraping and clanking. After a long moment, a section of debris shifted and opened a narrow gap. Shadow's head appeared in the opening. It chirped at her. Grace laughed despite everything. The deadliest creature in the galaxy had just cleared a path for her. She squeezed through the gap and found Shadow waiting on the other side, tail swishing slowly. "Good work," she said, and she meant it. They continued through the dying station, moving toward the communication center. Grace had to transmit her findings before the whole structure came apart. She had to make the council understand. They were not monsters. They were victims. And if she could not prove it in the next few hours, Shadow and every other in existence would continue to be treated as mindless threats to be caged and killed. Grace walked faster. Shadow stayed at her side. Outside the station windows, the great gas giant of 7 turned slowly in the endless dark. Grace wondered if anyone on those distant evacuation shuttles was watching. She wondered if they could see 2 figures moving through the dying station, human and creature, walking together toward something that might just change everything. The communication center was on level 2, near the station's main hub. Grace and Shadow moved through empty corridors, past abandoned workstations and sealed doors. The emergency lights flickered constantly now, sometimes leaving them in complete darkness for several seconds. Grace was no longer afraid of the dark. Shadow walked beside her, and somehow that made everything bearable. They found the communication center locked behind a heavy security door. Grace tried her access codes, but the system was offline. The door remained stubbornly closed. "I do not suppose you can phase through and open it from inside," Grace said to Shadow. The creature tilted its head. It approached the door and sniffed at the edges. Then it walked straight through the metal as if it were not there. Grace watched in amazement as the solid steel rippled around Shadow's body like water around a stone. A moment later, she heard clicks and whirs from the other side. The door slid open. Shadow sat inside the communication center, looking very pleased with itself. "You are full of surprises," Grace said. The main communication console was still operational, drawing power from a backup generator. Grace activated the system and began transmitting. She sent her video recordings of Shadow's calm behavior. She sent doctors' research from the archives. She sent her own observations and theories about why humans might be able to interact peacefully with. Admiral responded within minutes. His face appeared on the screen, and his expression was troubled. "Human Harper, the Council has reviewed your transmissions. There is debate." "What kind of debate?" "Some believe you have made a genuine discovery. Others believe the creature is manipulating you somehow, using a hunting strategy we have not seen before." Grace looked at Shadow. The creature had curled up beneath the console, resting its head on her foot. Its eyes were closed. Its breathing was slow and peaceful. "Does this look like a hunting strategy to you, Admiral?" Studied the image for a long moment. His tusks shifted as he ground his teeth, a sign of uncertainty. "It looks like nothing I have ever seen. That is what concerns me. Give me time to prove this is real. Let me bring Shadow to the evacuation shuttle. Let your scientists examine us both. If I am wrong, you can destroy us together. But if I am right, this changes everything we know about the. You would risk your life on this creature's behavior. I am. Was silent for a long moment. Voices argued in the background, too distant for the translator to catch. Finally, he spoke again. The Council has agreed to a compromise. We will not trigger the purge, but we will not send a shuttle to retrieve you. If you can reach the emergency hangar on level 6, there is a small transport still docked there. It has limited fuel but enough to reach our position. You have 4 hours before the station becomes too unstable to navigate. Thank you, Admiral. Do not thank me. If the creature harms you, if this is some elaborate hunting technique, then I will have allowed a human to die for nothing. The responsibility weighs on me. I understand. I will not let you down. The transmission ended. Grace looked at the path she needed to take. Level 6 was 4 levels down. The most direct route went through the central shaft, but that area had suffered the worst damage during the power failures. She would have to find another way. Shadow lifted its head and chirped at her. It seemed to sense her worry. We have a long walk ahead, Grace said. Are you ready? The creature stood and stretched. Its tail swished once, twice, then settled into a gentle curve. It moved to Grace's side and pressed against her leg. They walked. The journey was longer than Grace had expected. Several corridors were completely blocked. Others were flooded with toxic gas from ruptured containment units. Shadow proved invaluable in navigating these obstacles. The creature could sense dangers that Grace could not, pulling her back from unstable floors and guiding her around leaking pipes. It phased through barriers to check what lay ahead and returned to lead her along safer paths. They reached level 5 without serious trouble. That was when things went wrong. The corridor ahead of them suddenly filled with a hissing white mist. Grace recognized it immediately. Coolant gas from a ruptured life support unit. Not immediately lethal, but the temperature would drop rapidly. Already she could feel the cold biting at her exposed skin. Shadow made a distressed sound. The creature's fur stood on end and it pressed hard against Grace's leg. The cold was affecting it badly. Its movements became sluggish and its eyes lost some of their brightness. We need to move fast, Grace said. She lifted Shadow in her arms. The creature was heavier than it looked, dense muscle under soft fur, but Grace had always been stronger than she appeared. She ran through the gas cloud, holding her breath, feeling ice crystals form on her hair and eyelashes. Shadow shivered against her chest but did not struggle. They burst out of the gas cloud into a warmer section. Grace gasped for air and leaned against a wall. Shadow was trembling badly now. Its body temperature had dropped again, and it was going into the early stages of thermal shock. Grace looked around desperately. There was a maintenance closet nearby. She carried Shadow inside and found what she needed. Emergency blankets, the thin reflective kind that trapped body heat. She wrapped one around Shadow and pulled another around herself. Then she sat down and pulled the creature onto her lap, sharing her warmth. Stay with me, she whispered. We are almost there. Shadow made a weak chirping sound. Its eyes found hers and Grace saw fear there. Real fear, like a child waking from a nightmare. This creature had been alone and cold and frightened its entire life. It had been treated as a monster and locked in a cage. Now it was dying, and the only comfort it had was a human woman it had known for a few hours. Grace held it. I will not leave you, I promise. They stayed in the closet for 30 minutes while Shadow recovered. Grace talked the whole time, keeping her voice soft and steady. She told the creature about snow and how humans played in it as children. She told it about hot chocolate and warm fires and curling up with loved ones on cold nights. She told it that someday, when this was all over, she would find a way to bring Shadow somewhere warm and safe. The creature's trembling slowly stopped. Its breathing steadied. When Grace finally unwrapped the blankets, Shadow was alert again, weak but alive. Can you walk? Shadow stood carefully and took a few steps. Its movements were slow but steady. Good, level 6 is close. We can make it. They left the closet and continued their journey. The station groaned around them, louder than before. Metal screamed as structural supports gave way somewhere distant. They did not have much time. The emergency hangar appeared ahead of them, visible through a viewing window. Grace could see the small transport docked inside. Their way out. Their chance to prove everything. She was so focused on the destination that she almost missed the danger. A section of the floor gave way beneath her feet. Grace screamed as she fell, grabbing at the edge of the hole. Her fingers caught on twisted metal, cutting into her palms. Below her was a three-level drop into darkness. She could not see the bottom. Shadow reacted instantly. The creature grabbed Grace's jacket in its teeth and pulled. Its 6 legs braced against the floor, claws digging into metal for traction. Grace felt herself rising, slowly, painfully, until she could swing one leg over the edge and roll to safety. She lay on the floor, gasping, bleeding from her torn hands. Shadow stood over her, making worried sounds, nudging her face with its nose. "I am okay," Grace managed. "I am okay." She sat up and looked at her hands. The cuts were deep but not dangerous. She tore strips from her jacket and wrapped them around her palms. Shadow watched every movement with those intelligent amber eyes. "You saved my life," Grace said softly. Shadow chirped. It sounded almost embarrassed. Grace laughed despite the pain. She had come to this station as a liaison officer, a nobody that the aliens barely noticed. Now she was going to change the galaxy's understanding of its most feared creatures, and she owed it all to a shadow beast that just wanted to be warm. "Come on," she said, climbing to her feet. "Let us get out of here." The transport was old but functional. Grace strapped herself into the pilot's seat and ran through the startup sequence. Shadow curled up in the co-pilot chair beside her, watching the console lights with curious eyes. The creature seemed fascinated by the blinking displays and humming systems. "First time in a spaceship?" Grace asked. Shadow chirped. It sounded almost excited. The hangar doors opened automatically as Grace powered up the engines. Beyond them, the vast orange and brown swirls of 7 filled the view. The gas giant was beautiful in a cold and terrible way. Grace had looked at it through station windows for 2 years. She had never expected to be glad to leave. She guided the transport out of the hangar and into open space. Behind them, the research station drifted in its slow orbit. Grace could see sections of the hull venting atmosphere. Lights flickered throughout the structure as systems failed one by one. In a few hours, the station would break apart completely. "We made it," Grace said softly. Shadow made a sound that might have been agreement. The evacuation fleet appeared on her sensors, a cluster of ships holding position at a safe distance from the dying station. Grace transmitted her identification codes and received clearance to dock with Admiral's command ship. As she approached, she could see dozens of viewing ports filled with alien faces. They were all watching, waiting to see the impossible. A human woman and a shadow beast, arriving together and alive. The docking procedure was smooth. Grace shut down the engines and turned to Shadow. The creature was watching the airlock door with its ears flat against its head. It was afraid. "Listen to me," Grace said. She reached out and touched Shadow's head, stroking the soft, dark fur. "There are going to be a lot of aliens out there. They are scared of you. They think you are dangerous. I need you to stay calm and stay close to me. Can you do that?" Shadow looked at her with those amber eyes. It made a low sound, almost a whimper, and pressed its head against her hand. "I know you're scared too, but I will not let them hurt you, I promise." The airlock opened. Grace stepped out first and Shadow followed right behind her, pressed so close that she could feel its warmth against her legs. A dozen security officers stood in the corridor, weapons raised. Admiral waited behind them, his white tusks gleaming in the ship's bright lights. Everyone froze. Shadow made a small distressed sound at the sight of so many weapons pointed at it. Grace immediately moved to put herself between the creature and the soldiers. "Lower your weapons," she said. "It will not harm anyone." "Human Harper," said slowly, "you are asking us to trust a creature that has killed dozens of our people." "No, I am asking you to look at what is right in front of you. Shadow has had multiple opportunities to kill me. It saved my life instead. It cleared blocked corridors for me. It pulled me back from danger. It is not a monster. It never was." A murmur ran through the gathered soldiers. They had all seen Grace's transmissions. They had watched the videos of Shadow curled in her lap, but seeing it in person was different. The creature was pressed against Grace's legs, clearly seeking protection from her. It looked nothing like the terrifying predator from the security footage. Doctor pushed through the crowd. The scientist approached slowly, keeping her movements smooth and calm. Shadow watched her with wary eyes but did not react with aggression. "May I?" asked, holding out one copper-scaled hand. Grace looked at Shadow. The creature studied for a long moment. Then it leaned forward and sniffed the scientist's fingers, just as it had sniffed Grace's hand hours ago. His eyes went wide. "It is accepting me. They are accepting contact." Because you are not threatening it, Grace said. Because you approached with respect instead of fear. Admiral stepped forward. His soldiers tensed, but he waved them back. The old walked toward Grace and Shadow with deliberate steps. His face was unreadable. Human Harper, you have done something that no one in the history of the collective has ever achieved. You have made peaceful contact with an apex predator and survived. Shadow is not just a predator, Admiral. Shadow is an intelligent being that has been traumatized by decades of isolation and fear. All they are. We treated them as monsters, so they behaved as monsters. Given warmth and companionship, they respond with trust. Looked at Shadow. The creature looked back at him without flinching. For a long moment, Admiral and Shadow Beast studied each other. I have been a soldier for 90 cycles, said finally. I have fought wars against species that sought to destroy everything I loved. I have seen terrible things and done terrible things, and in all that time, I never thought to ask if my enemies might be victims too. He turned to his soldiers. Lower your weapons. The Shadow Beast is not a threat. The weapons came down. Grace felt tears prickling at her eyes, and she did not try to stop them. Shadow pressed against her legs and made a soft purring sound. The weeks that followed changed everything. Grace worked with Doctor to develop protocols for interaction. Other humans volunteered to test her theories, and the results were consistent. Responded to human warmth and gentleness with trust and affection. They could be approached safely if the handler remained calm and offered no threat. The Galactic Council held formal hearings. Grace presented her evidence, supported by Doctor and a growing number of scientists who had witnessed the changed behavior in captive. The debates were long and difficult. Many species had lost people to attacks. They were not quick to forgive. But the evidence was undeniable. The Council voted to end the containment program, would be rehabilitated, not caged. Human handlers would be trained to work with them. Eventually, the creatures would be returned to their home world to rebuild their population. Grace was offered a new position, ambassador to the home world, first human ever to hold such a title. She accepted without hesitation. On the day she departed, Admiral came to see her off. He found her in the shuttle bay with Shadow at her side. The creature was healthier now, its fur glossy and its eyes bright. It had gained weight and energy under Grace's care. Human Harper said, I came to apologize. For what? For doubting you, for almost destroying the station with you aboard, for 100 cycles of treating thee as enemies instead of trying to understand them. Grace smiled. You were afraid. Fear makes us do terrible things, but you listened when it mattered. That is what counts. Nodded slowly. His yellow eyes found Shadow, and the creature met his gaze without fear. I asked my advisors why humans are different, said. Why you could achieve what no other species could. They gave me many theories about body temperature and chemical signatures, but I think the truth is simpler than that. What do you think it is? You humans spent thousands of years turning wolves into dogs. You took wild predators and made them into companions through patience and kindness. No other species did this. No other species even tried. You saw a dangerous animal, and instead of caging it or killing it, you asked how to earn its trust. Grace thought about her childhood dog, about coming home from school to find it waiting at the door, about cold nights curled together under blankets, about the pure simple love between a human and an animal that had once been a wolf. That is what we do, she said. That is who we are. Shadow pressed against her leg and chirped happily. Grace reached down and scratched behind its ears. Admiral watched them with something like wonder in his ancient eyes. Go well, human Harper, and take care of your Shadow. I will, I promise. The shuttle doors closed. Grace took her seat and Shadow curled up beside her. Through the viewport, she could see stars stretching out toward the galactic rim. Somewhere out there, a world full of waited to meet the first humans who saw them as something other than monsters. The galaxy's most dangerous creature had escaped its cage. It had run through a dying station, terrified and alone, searching for warmth, and it had found something better. It had found a friend.